Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon, the show where I take a look at every episode of classic Doctor Who, one episode per day, plus a bunch of Big Finish audios. And today, on the 24th of January, 2018, we are starting the next televised Patrick Troughton story, The Krotons, which has the interesting distinction of being one of the few stories from the classic era repeated during its run. It was repeated in the lead up to Peter Davison's run as the Doctor, as part of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who, which was a special event which included the stories An Unearthly Child, the Krotons, of course, the 3 Doctors, the Carnival of Monsters, and the 4th Doctor's Swan Song, Logopolis, and of course lead up to the Peter Davison's debut as the Doctor in 1982. Now, what I find interesting is that this story, as a story, is also the first story written by Robert Holmes, which is important as Holmes becomes a very famous Doctor Who writer. Never wrote any audios, but he did write a number of TV stories, and was script editor during the early parts of the Tom Baker era. Now, that is important because this is our first impression of Holmes' writing, and the first episode is an okay start. Highlights include that the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe land on a planet, the planet of the Gons, where, well, we're built up as a society where you have people that take their smartest people, send them into this building, this structure, and they get killed. And no one knows that they get killed, and the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe arrive. They see a guy walking out, and he gets killed, and it's like, wait, what's happened? This is weird. There are also some weird things on the planet. Some of the architecture is off, according to the Doctor. It doesn't match up with what this planet should be. With the gravity of the planet, it looks like it's meant for a planet that is actually has a lower gravity, and that becomes important because the story involves a lot of just these little things. You have these people, the Gons, and they are servants to a race, some people known as the Krotons. We don't actually get a picture of the Krotons, but we know that they are in charge of this structure, and they have a giant snake thing that'll come out if their murder machine of the smart people gets killed, is destroyed. And that's where the cliffhanger ends. And the episode is interesting because it has a lot of sort of sentiments of the time, of a lot of students being unrest. It's the young people in this who are the ones that are like, hey, you can't do that. You can't just do this because this isn't right. There's no explanation for it. There's no reason to be doing this. So it's a very nuanced portrayal of people, and that's one thing that's interesting. And of course, the performances are interesting. But the episode itself is just a little bit on the side of kind of really boring. It really doesn't have too much going for it. And, you could probably go and watch a different story and be more interested. It's just not the best opening episode. I enjoy it. This is still a good episode. It has a lot of potential. This is an episode that really sort of it gives that Robert Holmes is a very good ideas man, but his story content leaves a bit to be desired. So I will give the Krotons episode 1 a 6 out of 10. Alright, it is the 25th of January 2018, and I just finished watching The Krotons episode 2, and this one actually improves slightly over episode 1 in quite a few aspects, mainly in the humor. Robert Holmes writes a very, very humorous script, with the Doctor and Zoe deciding, after getting the whole story from one of the Gons. The problem with this is the supporting characters are really bland, and they don't have... I can't even remember their names. So, the one with the curly hair, that's what I'm going to go with. Like, it's like, tells them, oh yeah, we just send them in and they're smart. And it's like, the doctors are like, hey, they have all these weird gaps in their knowledge, which is weird because it's like, they understand chemistry, but only like specific bits of chemistry. And like, but they're losing like bit one and bit two, but not the bit in between. Like, it's that sort of thing, which is really an interesting idea. It's, apparently this is, I don't know if, some people say this might be a political commentary on like fascism and the control of information again, and a call for the free flow of information, which I could actually get behind because that's actually probably a really interesting idea and a really interesting reading of the story. But you have this veiled in comedy with Zoe sitting in front of this learning machine and just sort of doing it and being hypnotized into doing it, like, oh, they make you feel really pleased with yourself, and that they're really happy for you, that they got it right. And she gets called in. The doctor gets pissed. So you get this hilarious scene where the doctor just, he does it. The gun suggests, hey, maybe this test is too difficult for you. It's like, no. And the doctor's like, no, he's almost as smart as I am. It's really funny. It's a genuinely humorous scene. And we actually have the reveal of the Krotons themselves, and they're very stationary monsters. They're also not supposed to look human. I like the design in principle, but in execution it's a bit rough. Like, the sets are very, we didn't have much money. Like, that's my big complaint about this one, is that a lot of the sets feel like it's like, we didn't have very much money to do this, so we tried our hardest. Don't hate us, please. And you have this funny thing, the Doctor and Zoe, like, they get essentially tortured. They see this primordial ooze, which I guess creates the Krotons, and they like sort of make this idea that this learning hall thing, it's almost like it's an organic structure, which, again, is a very interesting idea. A lot of these ideas that this story deals with are very interesting, and they sort of connect well with one another, and I really like that about this story. It just has the problem of not necessarily, knowing where it wants to go. The Krotons, they have a really weird voice. It's a weird story altogether. But I will give the Krotons episode 2 a 7 out of 10 because it does improve upon episode 1, mainly in the humor and just making it feel like it's a full story. So yeah, Krotons episode 2 gets a 7 out of 10. It is the 26th of January 2018, and I just finished watching episode 3 of the Krotons. And this one is full of padding. As an episode, it feels like it's just been like, right, we need to get somewhere. And I feel like we could have easily had the solution by now, because we have this great cliffhanger moment of the Krotons attacking the TARDIS and making it dematerialize. That's not even halfway through the episode. It's that moment is very much like it should be its own little cliffhanger, and it's not, which is a real shame, as it works well as a cliffhanger. It feels like that's what a good cliffhanger should do, and it feels like that's what Doctor Who does best, is that sort of cliffhanger, and it's not a cliffhanger. It's just the story keeps going after that, and we don't have a reason. You have mainly just not a lot going on. The plot is the Doctor realizes, hey, we can use acid to destroy the Krotons' machines and their hold over you, and it does some interesting moral dilemmas of like, well, we only know what the Krotons tell us, so we have really no way to beat them. So they kind of do have to rely on the Doctor because he can bring in the outside knowledge. It's sort of... The story was originally called The Space Trap or The Trap. And, that's sort of the trap it's talking about, that because that their knowledge has been dictated by these aliens who they don't have control over, over what happens to them. They cannot be the ones to... Really, they aren't the ones to do things. They have to be, sort of guided And that's a really clever idea. I like what Robert Holmes is trying to get at with that idea. It's just this sort of this very Doctor Who thing of I have to help you, but you have to be able to fend for yourselves. However, there are a lot of problems. One of them is the direction is falling flat. This story was directed by David Maloney, who directed the Mind Robber, which was a story with the Mind Robber was a story with excellent direction. Like, I love the Mind Robber, the direction of the Mind Robber. It's suitably creepy. It knows what type of story it is. It knows that that everything is evil. It knows how to creep you out and be just good fun. But this story doesn't seem to know how to do that. I think it's brought down by a pretty bad script overall. That's what's really stopping it from being a really good sort of story, a directed story. I also have to say, the costumes of the Krotons are horrible when you see them moving. There's a lengthy interrogation scene with Jamie that they're like supposed to be these big, intimidating creatures, and they're staring down Jamie, and Jamie's just like, "Oh, how am I gonna do this?" You start to see their skirts, which are cloth. It's a really bad effect. It feels like the production team had the costumes made before the actors were cast, so they weren't to the size of the actors. So it's just they're just sort of there, and that is really where this episode loses me. Just the whole point. Also, the cliffhanger isn't very effective. Like, it's the Krotons starting to be destroyed. Like, how... I mean, the Doctor's trying to stop him because Jamie's in there, but still, that's still a good thing. And, I mean, that's... The Jamie being there is, like, trying to add tension, but doesn't really add any tension. It's just sort of like, oh, and by the way, this is also a thing. Like, it doesn't really do much for the story. Like, the tension, it's not really there. It needs to be there in a greater force, in a more full effect. Basically, it's just a meh episode. So I'm going to give the Krotons episode 3 a 5 out of 10. Right, it is the 27th of January 2018, and I just finished watching episode 4 of The Krotons. And this is a weird episode to end the story on, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. Mainly because this is a short episode, running in at only about 22 minutes, as opposed to the usual 25 for an episode of the show. Now, why is that odd? Is because the story sort of wraps up really quickly, and it's like, oh, well, the Doctor and Krotons are defeated, we're leaving, come on, let's go. Jamie and Zoe, TARDIS dematerializes, roll credits. There isn't much time for, like, any formal wrap-up, and a lot of the episode is what is essentially known as a story loop. A really good example of the story loop is in An Earthly Child, where it's the Doctor and co get captured and escape just to be captured again. Mainly, this time it's Jamie. He's trying to escape. He gets captured again by the Krotons before the Doctor and Zoe try to rescue him. And of course, he gets thrown out of the machine. They find him. They save him. And, the Doctor literally just ends the story by pouring some sulfuric acid in the giant tank that was set up in episode 2, which is almost like Chekhov's tank. You set it up in the first act to be mysteriously destroyed in the fourth act as the resolution to the plot. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look up Chekhov's gun. It's a literary technique, and it's not a bad episode per se. It does some good stuff. It really does. I really want to like this one a lot, but the Krotons are really bad villains. That's what's part of the problem. They are not very intimidating, and they just sort of get destroyed. and like the politics on the planet. At this point, I'm not interested in any of these characters. Robert Holmes, the only character that I really like is Elick, and because he's played by Philip Maddock, who is one of those actors who was in Who a couple of times, and every time he's in Who, he was amazing in it, and he was the best thing about it. We'll see him again in the War Games and The Brain of Morbius, and I think actually he's in a couple of audios. He's in a Seventh Doctor audio, which is also really good. But this is the first appearance of Philip Maddock, and he's an excellent actor. Almost way too talented for this story, if I'm going to be brutally honest. Because this story does not know how to properly end its plot without being like, well, we sort of have an idea, we don't really, but we might if we really tried. This is just a story that I really don't like. This episode just it doesn't end on a high note. The ending is not it's not very good. It doesn't know what it wants to be, if it wants to be serious. And I mean, there's some really good stuff. When about to just pour the thing into the tank, the Doctor and Zoe procrastinate by making a fuss about how are we going to stand, and ooh, is this how you put the headsets on, and putting them on the wrong way. And they're hilarious. They're hilarious moments. Those little moments are hilarious, and I love them. They are actually really, really funny as well. They know how to make something in this story feel like it's big and good, and it knows what it wants to be. But, and this is a big but, as a story, it just doesn't really have all that much going for it. As a story, it keeps itself isolated as pretty close to how much it can be. So I'm gonna give, and it has a decent conclusion, but it doesn't really do too much with that conclusion. So I'm gonna give the Krotons episode 4 a 4 out of 10 because it's not a very good closing, and it just doesn't know how to end itself. That, of course, is the end of the story, so we averaged the 4 episodes to give the Krotons a final score of 5.5 out of 10. Thank you, everybody, for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. Please leave a like, and please leave feedback if you like these videos in the comments down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you next time when we go to our first 6-part story in a while with The Seeds of Death.